Wade in, and I'm live! It's the Nazarite, bringing you Hebrew lore from days of yore. In this week's Torah portion, Behar, which is also called Behar Sinai, it's everything having to do with, well, not everything, a lot of things having to do with the land, and in particular, the Sabbath of the land. Every 6 years, they would be doing everything having to do with agricultural industry, right? Each one with their crops, sowing and harvesting in due season. In the seventh year, nobody would sow, nobody would sow, nobody would reap, and everyone in the country basically would feed off the land. That means mankind, animals, insects, etc. It was just a free-for-all. This idea of giving the Sabbath to the land is crucial. Mankind, right, we all, whether you believe in the biblical story of Genesis or in evolution, we all came from the earth and at some point crawled on the land. But the point I'm trying to make is that there's a connection between earth and man that is very, very concrete. And Adam in Hebrew, meaning man, and Adama, meaning earth or land, well, you can see Adam, Adama, there's a connection there. That's very, very fundamental, since we are half animal, so to speak, and half divine, or with the potential, right, of being godly. So giving the Sabbath its land is one of the things that we are commanded to do in the land of Israel. It's also one of the things which the prophets kept saying, listen, you're worshiping false idols, you're not treating each other right, fine. What did the land do to you? Well, not fine, you know what I mean. When I say that, what I mean to say is that the issue of the Sabbath of the land every 7 years is something that was crucial. And this was one of the pivotal, it was one of the commandments where God said, I can't, thank you. There wasn't, wait, sorry, I have a little message on chat. So what I want to say is, well, good Sabbath to you, all the way there in Israel. I'm sorry I couldn't answer before. The Sabbath of the land is something that the prophets said, if you don't keep it, then the land will throw you out. Like it's a living organism, right? The earth is a living organism after a fashion. And wait, I think this is going to fall. We're good? We're good. The earth is a living organism, right? And everything there lives and breathes and dies and comes back, and it's a whole circle of life thing. So giving the Sabbath its land is crucial. This is also, you can also see this idea of 6 years and the seventh with the case of the Hebrew slave or handmaid, where they work for 6 years being a slave. On the 7th year, they must be let go. If they do not want to be let go for whatever reason, then they may choose to stay, but only until 7 times 7 years have passed. In other words, on the 50th year, which also appears in this week's Torah portion, the 50th year after 7 Sabbaths of the land have been observed, the 50th year is made holy and sacred and set apart. It's the Jubilee, where all of the slaves who chose to remain go back home. All of the land remains, a free-for-all and for everyone to feast on and live off of. And any lands that were purchased through whatever deals that were made, somebody needed fast cash, somebody didn't have money to pay, their land, their home, their ancestral part in the land of Israel was sold or given, for that matter. At that time of the 50th year, everything sort of resets. There's this idea of the 50th year being a reset. It's a deeply Kabbalistic idea, but I won't get into it now. And being a slave, let's go to that. Professor Yuval Noah Harari, he said that the agricultural revolution, it was an amazing thing. I'm paraphrasing, right? And it was an amazing thing, but it also was to the detriment of people, of the human race, to a degree, very much to the detriment on different levels. I don't remember precisely now, so I won't, I won't misquote him or misconstrue, whatever the word is. I won't get into it with regards to Professor Harari, but once every 7 years rather, giving the Sabbath its land. It's something of the highest importance. Nowadays in the state of Israel, they are trying to do that. It's a whole thing with Jewish law, halacha, but it's still being observed in the land of Israel as one of the things that can be observed and should be observed in the land of Israel, where you just say, okay, I'm going to back off and let the land do its thing. I won't be manipulating it. Whatever grows, grows. The Torah portion continues. Wait, hold on. Okay. Another thing that happens in this week's Torah portion is that we get a glimpse into the a part which is very, very relevant, which is not. Goodbye. Good Shabbos. It's not something that. Oh, wait, I didn't say what I was about to say. I was distracted. I was distracted by the chat because it's right here at the corner of my eye. Okay. Let me get back to where I was. There's also the prohibition on. No, that's cool. It's also the prohibition on taking interest from your fellow Hebrew man or woman. Your brother or sister who you lend money to, you are not allowed to. They should not be paying you with interest. Whatever you gave, they give you back without any interest. The Torah says you can do that to other nations, and that has been used to a great degree throughout history, right? The Jew, right? The Shylock controlling everything, the money, that whole stigma or stereotype, however you want to call it. I don't know where that stands. I know people say Jews control the world, and to that I say, really? If we were in control, I can see how things would be different. But, to each his own. So you're allowed to lend money to your Hebrew sister or brother, and when you get it back, you do not. They do not pay you any interest. I think that's a wonderful thing. I don't know anything about economics or banking, and this is yet another thing. No, never mind. Let's not get into that. I say that a lot, and I've said that a lot. That I say it a lot because the Torah is so abundant, and there are so many things. It's like you're walking through a great hall filled with knowledge and books and anecdotes and fantasy and reality and all that mixed up, and it's very, very. I go on a lot of tangents. I hope I'm always able to sort of go back. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. We'll see where we end up. That's the fun about this being live. For the first 3 months, I was doing it, just recording and editing and doing all that. And for these months, I'm deciding to just wing it. Whatever will be, will be. I'm almost at 100 subscribers. So thank you, each and every one of you. At some point when I get to 100, I might do a Q&A because I know that people like them. And it's something that I've done in the past to a degree, to a certain extent, but not on YouTube. So that'll be good. Back to this week's Torah portion. Liberty, liberation. What does it mean? What is the liberation of the land? What is the liberation of the individual? The liberation of the slave? Well, I mentioned Harari earlier because we've sort of made the land our bitch. We sort of imposed our will on it. And it was a very natural progression, in the history of mankind, but it's still something like that nonetheless. I mean, if you think back in the Garden of Eden, there were the trees who bared fruit, bared fruit. And only after the sin, right, the first missing of the mark, right, after they sinned in the Garden of Eden, then agriculture became a curse, where God said to Adam and Eve, you will have to work the land and toil until you get what you want from it. And later on with the generations and in time it became the industry of agriculture and then the Industrial Revolution, which hastened a lot of different things. But that original sort of Eden, that root sustenance was not so much, I think, through agriculture I don't know enough about agriculture, but suffice to say that in the Garden of Eden, it was there on the trees, sort of ready to be taken. And only afterwards were we, so giving the land its Sabbath, giving the human being his Sabbath, like we're about to have now, once a week, giving the slave his opportunity for freedom every 7 years, and giving him his freedom even if he doesn't want it on the 50th year. Giving the slave freedom on the 50th year even if he doesn't want it, you set him free. The Hebrew man is not meant to be a slave. I think nobody is meant to be a slave, but for all intents and purposes, because of this, the weekly Torah portion thing, it speaks of the Israelites and the Hebrew people. And the Hebrew person can be a slave for 6 years, and then his freedom is given to him. Ideally, there were times when this was not done, and you can see that in Jeremiah and Isaiah, I think. And once every 7 years, you give the land its Sabbath. It needs to be left alone for a year. The Hebrew man is not meant to remain a slave, and on the 50th year, even if he wants to, I think, you force him to go back to where he belongs. On the 50th year, we all go back to where we belong. Like I said, reality, and reality kind of resets, where it goes back to this a place where it's like first places, the default setting of Israel on their land with their tribes, each with their own plots and things that were handed down from father to son within the tribe. It's a wonderful idea, this idea of resetting. And it's announced, this year of Jubilee is announced on Yom Kippur, the holiday of atonement of that year. So it's announced then. There's so much there. There's so much there, but I don't want to ramble. And I also have to help to prepare the Sabbath. There's still things to do. I am so very grateful to be able to do this. And now I will say goodbye and good Shabbos. Thank you for watching, and I'll be in touch about that Q&A thing. Thank you for being subscribers. If you are subscribers, if you're not, consider subscribing, because I think it's going to get interesting, more interesting as time goes on. Be well. God bless. Ah. Ooh. Ooh.